This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil prices ticked up on Thursday after falling nearly 2% in the previous session, with investors weighing a potential OPEC Plus output increase against conflicting tariff signals from the White House and ongoing U.S.-Iran nuclear talks. Brent crude futures rose 8 cents, or 0.12%, to $66.20 a barrel by 05:05 GMT, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude CLC1 gained 9 cents, or 0.14%, to $62.36 a barrel. Prices settled down 2% in the previous trading session after Reuters reported that several OPEC Plus members would suggest the group accelerate oil output increases for a second month in June, citing three sources familiar with the OPEC Plus talks.
The U.S. upstream oil and gas M&A market is bracing for the most challenging conditions since the COVID-19 pandemic as oil prices slump and prime acreage dries up, analytics firm Enverus said on Wednesday, even though deal-making jumped last quarter to the second-best start to the year since 2018. The expected downturn in mergers and acquisitions follows a series of blockbuster takeovers by oil and gas majors in recent years, which culminated in a record $192 billion worth of deals done in 2023. There was $17 billion worth of deals disclosed in the quarter ended March 31st, but activity was disproportionately driven by Diamondback Energy, which accounted for almost half of total value, said Enverus intelligence research principal analyst, Andrew Dittmar.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Kazakhstan will prioritize national interests over those of the OPEC Plus group when deciding on oil production levels, the country's newly appointed energy minister told Reuters, ratcheting up the standoff with the group. Kazakhstan has repeatedly exceeded its oil output quotas over the past year, angering some OPEC Plus members, including top producer Saudi Arabia, which pushed for speedier hikes of OPEC Plus production at the last meeting, OPEC Plus sources have said. Kazakhstan pumps about 2% of global output and relies for most of its production on global majors, such as US Chevron and ExxonMobil, which have invested hundreds of billions of dollars in the country since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The Trump administration on Wednesday said it would implement an emergency permitting process for energy and mining projects on federal lands, slashing approval times that typically take months or years to at most 28 days. The U.S. Department of the Interior move is in response to President Donald Trump's National Energy Emergency Declaration, which he made on his first day in office to speed permitting in an effort to boost domestic energy supplies, bring down fuel prices and bolster national security. In a statement, the DOE said the emergency procedures would apply to fossil fuels like oil, gas and coal, uranium, geothermal, critical minerals, biofuels and kinetic hydropower projects. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. India is expecting steel imports from China, South Korea and Japan to slow after imposition of temporary tariffs this week, a government source directly aware of the situation told Reuters on Thursday. On Monday, India, the world's second biggest producer of crude steel, imposed a 12% temporary tariff, or provisional safeguard duty, on some steel imports for 200 days.
Copper prices scaled three-week peaks on Wednesday as worries about global trade tensions eased after U.S. President Donald Trump suggested import tariffs on top consumer China could fall. Benchmark copper on the London Metal Exchange was up 0.1% at $9,379 a metric ton at 16:03 GMT, having reached an earlier peak of $9,481.50, the highest since April 3. It has gained more than 15% since hitting a 17-month low at $8,105 earlier this month. Both Trump and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent have separately suggested there could be a de-escalation in U.S.-China trade tensions and that any trade deal with China could, substantially, cut tariffs.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Chicago soybean futures rose for a fourth consecutive session on Thursday amid hopes that Washington and Beijing will de-escalate their trade war and allow the revival of U.S. soy exports to China. Corn futures steadied after falling on Wednesday under pressure from a stronger US dollar, while wheat continued to slip as rain in the US and Black Sea cropping regions improved the supply outlook. The most active soybean contract on the Chicago Board of Trade was up 0.4% at $10.54 minus 1/4 a bushel at 0516 GMT and near Wednesday's intraday peak of $10.57 minus 1/2, its highest level since February 24.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.